In the video today, we're answering a viewer question because Rinny KG asks, why are women sometimes called sluts, dames, and broads? Well, let's start with slut. Slut originally didn't mean at all what it means today. For instance, in a diary from 1664, Samuel Pepys writes, "Our little girl Susan is a most admirable slut, and pleases us mightily, doing more service than both the others, and deserves better wages." In modern times, this diary entry seems rather suggestive, but at the time, while the term had begun to take on a more suggestive connotation of a woman with loose morals, it still also was commonly used with the original meaning, and that would mean messy, dirty, or untidy when referring to a woman or girl. Because of this, at the time it was used frequently for kitchen maids and servant girls, as Pepys was talking about in the preceding quote. The word first popped up in English with this latter slovenly definition around the 14th century, and by the 15th century had started to be used to describe promiscuous women as well. It also came to be a somewhat common term for an ugly woman, as in a quote from 1715, "Nor was she a woman of any beauty, but was a nasty slut." In the 19th century in England, slut still retained something of its original meaning, even so far as garbage cans being called slut holes. Oh man! Okay, let's do it. In the 19th century in England, slut still retained something of its original meaning, even so far as garbage cans being called slut holes, meaning a hole for rubbish. This can be seen in a Saturday Review snippet from 1862. There are a good many slut holes in London to rake out. Much more recently, Helen Fielding in Bridget Jones's Diary used the word slut with its original meaning. Check plates and cutlery for telltale signs of sluttish washing up. So the original meaning is definitely still around, albeit much less commonly used than the now promiscuous definition. As to where the word slut came from, this isn't entirely known. It may have come from the German Schlut, meaning slovenly woman, or the Swedish slata, meaning idle woman. It's also noteworthy that before slut popped up as a word to describe an untidy woman, a variation of it was used by Chaucer to describe a slovenly male, using the word sluttish in this sense in 1386. Alright, now let's move on to the origin of the word dame. Dame first popped up in English around the 13th century from the Old French dame, meaning wife or mistress, which in turn came from the Latin domina, meaning mistress of the house, lady. Domina also has its origins in the same Latin word that domestic ultimately came from, namely domus, meaning house. In the 13th century, dame was synonymous with female ruler, and indeed even today, dame is considered the female equivalent of sir, as in a knighthood in the UK. Further, originally a knight's wife was given the title of dame, though this changed to be lady a few centuries after dame entered English. By the 14th century, dame extended to also being sometimes used generically as a title for a housewife. Around the early 20th century, in American English, dame started to be used as synonymous with the generic word woman, and gradually, over the course of the last century in American English, has come to have derogatory connotations despite its illustrious origins. Alright, that's dame wrapped up, let's move on to broad. Broad, as referring to a woman rather than something with great breadth, has slightly less certain origins. It first popped up being used in this way in the very early 20th century. Theories as to its origin include simply referencing a woman's broad hips, or perhaps from the American English a broad wife, which was a term for a slave woman or just a woman who was separated from her husband. Another popular theory is that it came from a slang term for ticket, such as a train ticket, a meal ticket, a sporting event admission ticket, etc. This slang term became common around 1912, and by 1914, broad was being used, among other things, to refer to a prostitute, thus a pimp's meal ticket. Broad possibly came to mean ticket from the 18th century practice of sometimes calling playing cards broads. This derives from the fact that in the early 20th century, many types of tickets often resembled playing cards. This theory is attested in the 1914 work A Vocabulary of Criminal Slang by Jackson and Hellyer, where they define broad as such. Noun, current amongst genteel grafters chiefly. A female confederate, a female companion, a woman of loose morals. Broad is derived from the far-fetched metaphor of meal ticket, signifying a female provider for a pimp, from the fanciful correspondence of a meal ticket to a railroad or other ticket. Whatever the case, when broad first showed up as referring to a woman, it generally was thought to signify a prostitute or immoral woman. This gradually changed somewhat in the century, with broad slowly coming to be used less as a derogatory term and more just as synonymous with woman. One of the earliest instances of this was in the 1932 Guys and Dolls, where one of the characters refers to another as a broad without any sort of negative connotation. This change is in contrast to dame, which used to be a solely honorific title, and it gradually came to be used in a derogatory sense. As Frank Sinatra said, calling a girl a broad is far less coarse than calling her a dame. In the cases of broad and slut, there have also been recent efforts to take back the term and spin them in a more positive light. For instance, in A Dictionary of Words About Women by Jane Mills, a broad is defined as a woman who is liberal, tolerant, unconfined, and not limited or narrow in scope. Slut, while still retaining the same modern loose woman connotation, has begun to be a label worn proudly in some circles, though not without controversy. As Rebecca Traister in the New York Times states, "At a moment when questions of sex and power, blame and credibility and gender injustice are so ubiquitous and so urgent, I have mostly felt irritation that stripping down to skivvies and calling ourselves sluts is passing for keen retort." And now for some bonus facts. Another common word for a woman, generally a young woman, is chick. This comes from a practice that started around the 17th century of calling children chicks, shortened from chicken, and adopted from the practice of calling baby chickens chicks that started around the 14th to the 15th centuries. Around the 1920s, chick started to be used just to refer to young women rather than male and female children. And now for another bonus fact. Before 1967, a track and field long jump was called a broad jump. However, due to broad being seen as an offensive term at the time and the fact that women were competing in broad jumps, the term was changed to long jump. And now for another bonus fact. Pieces of bread that were too hard from insufficient kneading were once called slut pennies, beginning around the 15th century. This was in reference to the fact that servant girls and kitchen maids were often called sluts. So I really hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please do give us a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you actually find out about when we release new videos, which, as I mentioned, is every day. But if you're looking for something else right now, why not check out our podcast? It's kind of like this, but longer form, more discussion-based. You can find a link to that in the description below, or just search Brain Food, one word, wherever you listen to your podcasts. You could probably do that on your phone right now if you wanted to. And as always, thank you for watching. In the 19th century in England, slut still retained something of its original meaning, even so far as garbage cans being called slut holes. I can't leave this all in.